Good morning, church. 2 weeks ago, I was preparing to leave for our mission trip to Arizona, which went great, by the way, and I can't wait to share with you more about that. But I spoke to us about kindness, showing kindness to others, and I referenced Jesus's great parable of the Good Samaritan as an illustration of loving our neighbor. Well, little did any of us know the challenges that we would be facing just a few short days later and the need to really put into practice what we've been preaching. This has been a scary week for a lot of us. People are taking precautions with the threat of the COVID-19 virus, been on the news all around us. And I know that people have had different reactions. Some, like the fella in the Dallas airport I saw on Wednesday in a full hazmat suit walking up and down the concourse. Others I saw on Facebook, spring breakers in Florida, disregarding just about any of it. And I'll admit I was pretty skeptical at first, not paying much mind to it. But the more I've learned and the more I've read, the more I believe we need to be taking this very seriously and exercising good judgment. I don't want to live out of fear, but certainly want to practice good common sense and good judgment. And so it's out of this concern that I really appreciate our elders. They have been here every day for the last 3 days, working, calling, meeting together, praying together. And I appreciate them for making the tough call to cancel our worship services and our Bible classes for the next several weeks out of concern for people. But now that doesn't mean that we're canceling worship, and we want you to know that. We want you and your family to worship. We're just encouraging you to do it maybe a little differently than we're used to doing it in smaller groups or with your families over the next couple of weeks. If you didn't receive the email or the message on the website, see the message on the website or on Facebook, I encourage you to do that because it explains a bit more about how we are planning on responding to this new season that we are in. www.wscoc.net is the website. Go there and read their statement. But we want to encourage you with opportunities to worship at home with your families. We want to continue to encourage you to serve one another, and to love one another, and to be the church. This is a great opportunity, if we look at it that way, for you to grow as a family together. Invite a friend, invite a neighbor over for worship. So if you haven't already, go and read that. Over the next 3 Sundays, at least, I'm planning on bringing our messages exclusively online. And I've been working on a series that I plan to start next week. Well, welcome to my office, such as it is. This is where I am this morning. Won't always be here, but this is where I am this morning. Apologize for the state that it is in. I saw this meme, if I can share it with you here real quickly, this week on Facebook. And I thought that was pretty good, pretty funny. Just like that, we're all televangelists. Well, I don't know if I'm a televangelist. I'm going to need better hair. But I ask that you bear with me. We're going to do the best we can to get through this together. This morning, I want us to return to a theme from a couple of weeks ago, and I want to bring you a message really from the entirety of God's Word. Yeah, that's right. The whole Bible, all of God's Word. Are you ready for this? The internet's a big place. We're all quarantined. What else are we going to do? Actually, I'm going to start with this verse in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13. I believe you can see that now. Paul writes, beginning in verse 13, he says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The Apostle Paul is writing here to a group of churches that are struggling to deal with a new reality. These churches had received the gospel, the good news of freedom in Jesus, But they were being told by some that they needed to go back to their former way of doing things, going back to the old law, the laws and the rituals that they had practiced in Judaism, to the legalism of all of that. And he says this: you are called to freedom, but don't use that freedom as a way of indulging the flesh. Use that freedom to serve one another. And he reminds us that the whole law is summed up in this command: love your neighbor as yourself. You see it right there. The whole law, so simple and yet so profound. Jesus would repeat that on a number of occasions. In Mark chapter 12 and verse 28, Jesus, we have this event in the life of Jesus. One of the scribes came up and heard them disputing. His disciples were arguing with one another. Imagine that. And seeing that, he answered them well, and he asked them, which commandment is the most important? And Jesus answered, the most important is this: hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. Well, I don't have to convince you this morning, probably, of the importance of loving your neighbor. But what are we doing to love our neighbor this week? What can we do to love our neighbor in this current situation that we're in? I want to suggest to you, not only is this extremely relevant for us, but it is vital for us that we look for ways to do just that this week and throughout however long this ordeal lasts. I want to suggest to you this morning 3 ways that we need to love our neighbor this week. Number 1, by practicing social distancing. One of the things, that's a word that has become a part of our vernacular this week, hasn't it? And one of the things I've been learning as I've been watching some of the reports about this virus and the real danger that it presents us is that the real danger occurs when incidences of sick people spike to a level that our healthcare system cannot sustain. And I will show you, see if I can show you this diagram here, or this graphic. There we go. Just think about what would happen if just 1% of residents in Lincoln County were to get the virus. CDC numbers estimate some populations could be hit much harder than 1%, quite a bit more. Our hospitals couldn't care for all the sick, and those who are in need of emergency care, folks having heart attacks, stroke, car accidents, wouldn't have anywhere to go because the hospitals would be full. And this is what's happened in some countries, such as Italy. And it's scary to think about. That's not my purpose this morning to scare you, but social distancing has been recommended as a way to sort of flatten that curve in the increase of incidences of sickness. So think about this now in the context of loving our neighbor. If we could slow the spread of this virus, if we could flatten the curve, so to speak, just by staying in, practicing good common sense judgment as it relates to getting out into crowds and being together with lots of people, why wouldn't we? Studies are telling us that while we're all susceptible, and young people as well as older getting sick, it's those who are older and those who already have pre-existing health conditions such as diabetes, heart, lung disease. It's those who are especially vulnerable to this being a life-threatening deal for them. So doesn't that behoove all of us to love one another by practicing careful distancing from one another? It seems counterintuitive, but it may be what we need to do over these next few weeks. If we can keep others from getting sick just by being smart and careful, why wouldn't we do that? That's what I want us to encourage. Paul wrote the book of Philippians from a jail cell. um, isolated and alone, unable to get out. And yet he had a great influence over a number of churches, even while he was in quarantine, if you will. And in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, he says this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. This isn't about me. This isn't maybe even about you getting sick, but it's about keeping others, those we love, from getting sick and dealing with this. If we can do that by practicing good common sense, we need to do that. But now listen, I'm not saying isolate yourself in quarantine and don't have any contact with the outside world. In fact, just the opposite of that. I want to challenge us to love our neighbor by practicing social distancing, but secondly, I want us to practice loving our neighbor by calling and checking on them. This is really a great opportunity for us to call and to check on those who live around us, especially those who are alone, live alone, or those who are elderly. They may need groceries, they may need toilet paper, and not want to risk getting out. And call and check on them. Ask if they need anything. Can you run by and get something? Maybe even leave it on their porch or something like that. We've asked our deacons and group leaders to reach out to their folks in their groups, just to check on them. We want to make sure everybody's okay through this thing. I know that our elders have been calling all day, all weekend, checking on people, and our deacons as well. And not just about physical items either, like groceries and toilet paper, but there's some emotional needs, some spiritual needs out there that we can minister to during this time. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear out there. People are scared, especially if they're sitting at home watching the news all day, 24/7. I know they're scared. Well, the Bible tells us in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18 that perfect love drives out fear. We need to make sure that all those around us, and certainly every member of our church family, feels the love of their church family, that we share the love of Christ with them. You know, most of us have access to a telephone. Some of us in our pockets, we use it all the time for other things. What a great tool this is, and it's something every one of us have, and we can use this to encourage. Reach out and call your neighbors, talk to them. But not just fear. Loneliness is a real issue. Some of you have been on quarantine, self-quarantine for a week or so already, and you're going stir crazy. I know. Can you imagine how it is not to be able to get out and about for weeks upon weeks? Well, that's how many of our homebound members feel. Many of our folks who are in nursing homes feel. Loneliness can be a real problem. And we may see this become increasingly a problem, depending on how long this goes. I love what Psalm 68 and verse 6 says. He says in the NIV, God sets the lonely in families. I love that. In other words, God's plan, if you will, for those who are experiencing loneliness is to give them a family. That's what we are, aren't we? A church family. Let's be sure that every member of our family feels that love of Christ, that love of family through this season. And finally, this morning, I want us to love our neighbor by finding creative ways to serve. The church mustn't stop being the church just because we can't all come together as a corporate body this morning. We're still the church. We're still the people of God. We are still to be loving and serving others, our neighbors, even if that has to look a little different for a season. We may need to get a little creative in our serve, but we can still serve. I appreciated, for example, those who helped us this week come up with a way to provide communion Sunday morning to everyone without everyone having to bake their own bread. And that took some creative thinking. We realized if we're not meeting together on Sunday morning, how is everybody going to have communion? So I want to thank those who went and got supplies and then made them available at the building. Saturday, we've announced Saturday from 10 to 2 and Sunday from 9 to 10. Communion is available to come by and pick up and go home and worship with your families. And we're going to make sure we do this every week. People have access to that. That took a little creative thinking. I appreciate those who came up with that idea. Thank you to those who delivered communion to people's homes this weekend. We want to make sure that this continues. And there's probably going to be many other needs that'll come up, and we may have to get a little creative to meet those needs. By the way, thank you to those who've coached me in making this video this morning and assisting and loading it up to our YouTube, Facebook, and website. And we're probably going to improve on this process as we move forward. Hopefully we don't have to do it too long. But let me say too, if you're watching this on a laptop or a device and you know of folks who don't have access to that technology, invite them over to your house to watch and to view. In all these things, we want to emphasize we are still the church. We still want to be a light to this community. We still want to love our neighbor as ourselves. What would it look like if we did this? I heard a story not long ago and was reminded of it this week of a monastery that had fallen on hard times. It had once been a great order, but as a result of several factors, it had declined, and there were only 5 monks who were living in a decaying old house, all of them up in years, and they knew that the future of their order was not very bright. In the woods surrounding the monastery, there was a little hut where a fellow priest from a nearby town would come and often spend some time in prayer. And the abbot of the monastery went to the hut to meet the priest in hopes that the priest would share with him some advice, some encouragement as to how they could once again bring flourishing to their order. The priest welcomed the abbot at his hut, but when the abbot explained the purpose of his visit, the priest could only commiserate with him. He said, I know how it is. The spirit's gone out of people. It's the same in our town. Almost nobody comes to church anymore. The old abbot and the priest, they wept together and they talked together and they prayed together. And when it came time for them to leave, the abbot said, you still don't have any advice for me? The priest said, well, I don't. I'm sorry, but the only thing I can tell you is this. There is one among you who will save the order, but I can't tell you who it is. The abbot returned to the monastery, told his fellow monks what that old priest had said. One of you is going to save the order, but I can't tell you who. Well, in the days and the weeks and the months that followed, the old monks pondered this, and they wondered which one of them would it be. Was it the father of the abbot? Was it old brother Thomas or brother Eldred, who was kind of grumpy but had a gift for ministering to people and being there in times of needs, or that sort of thing? And so they all contemplated, which one of us is it going to be to save the order? Well, as they each contemplated in this way, the old monks began to treat each other differently. They began to show extraordinary love and respect to one another on the off chance that one among them might be that one who would restore their order, if you will. Well, because the forest was situated in a beautiful area, visitors still came to visit the monastery, picnic on its lawns, walk around the paths and that sort of thing. And as they did so, without even being aware of it at first, they sensed this aura of extraordinary love and respect that now began to surround these 5 monks and seemed to radiate out from them and permeate the atmosphere of the place. And they would they would return and they would bring visitors with them, and more. And after a while, some began joining the order, and one after another. And so within a few years, the monastery had once again become a thriving order, thanks to the priest's gift. It became a vibrant center of light, spirituality in the realm. Folks, in church, the church can be an amazing place, an amazing people when it's working as it's supposed to be. When we are treating one another as if each person were Christ himself. When we're following the command Jesus gave us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Church, if we can serve you in any way, if you need prayer, if you would like to talk more about what it means to follow Jesus, we would love that opportunity. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can comment. You can send us a private message. You can email, text, respond in some way. We will be glad to pray with you. In the meantime, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. God bless.